Hi there, Heather Prekop, Senior Director, Global CPG here at Euromonitor. Right now, I am here with Matt and Kayla, both out of our Chicago office. Matt speaking as a head analyst for our health area, and Kayla for beauty. And really here today to just recap on a couple of themes of what we heard last week at CAGNY from these health and beauty players, and to get the take from both Kayla and Matt. So I think just wanting to start off, one that was a very apparent topic that got brought up is the performance of 2024, and specifically the slowdown that we saw in China. I know P&G and L'Oreal both had a slide specifically carving out what that performance looked like from rest of world, excluding North Asia or excluding China, and then that component separately, just to show how much that China slowdown had impacted the global picture. So I guess, Kayla, if you wanted to start first from a beauty aspect, what are your thoughts there?
Sure. China's been a market that a lot of the beauty players have been looking at, first because of its sheer size, second because of its very strong historic performance. And it obviously every year we get the question, how will it perform now compared to how it's performed in the past? We can see that the effects that we're seeing in China, at least on the beauty and personal care industry, is no longer a function of COVID. The Chinese consumer has fundamentally evolved to be more price sensitive. And this is a result of innovations in the industry, but also some macroeconomic factors. So what we're seeing in 2024 as we finalize our data points, we're potentially looking at a decline in the key beauty categories in China in 2024 in skincare, color cosmetics, and fragrances. And that's in current and constant terms. And this is essentially coming back to this idea that the local consumer is losing confidence in their future income. There's a lot of price sensitivity going on, and that doesn't necessarily mean that certain brands are not doing well in China, but it really is, and it's affecting the overall performance of the market. And what we've seen so far is that some brands are doing really well. So, for example, the majority, over 90% of the brands that are actually growing are domestic, local C beauty players. And they have been taking share for many years from the multinational brands. And so this is creating like this big dichotomy where you have a local brand that it maybe has more mass or masstige pricing that's doing really well. It has fast R&D time, fast route to market, maybe 3 to 6 months only. Uh, and it's really resonating with the local consumer. And then you have your multinational brands that have been struggling. They've had difficulties controlling their pricing, across different distribution systems. And so you get, this sort of a bit of a different story across the brands. And of course, that varies by category. It's no surprise that the Chinese consumer is very savvy in skincare, but there is potential to grow in color cosmetics and fragrances, but routines are less developed. So, if brands are coming in and they're seeing the slowdown, but they're also seeing some brands grow, it's because they've really honed into a niche in that market.
Great. So really the tale of two cities in
Yeah.
China is the local players versus the multinational players, with
Yeah.
the difference in performance from last year. And I guess I would also, you speak to a bit of pricing strategy and, premium versus mass. Uh, I believe there's something, a recession glam you had spoken about in the past. Maybe talk to us a little bit more about that, whether China or just globally, how consumers are looking at that trend.
Yeah, so for many years, Euromonitor has really looked at different ways this idea of premiumization and affordability has evolved. And for our key themes for 2025, we've identified recession glam as a trend that encompasses all these things we're seeing. And this is really a big umbrella term for, a lot of different directions. You have some consumers that are trading down from premium to masstige or masstige to mass. You have consumers that are stocking up on products that go on promotion or during shopping festivals. It's essentially consumers really looking for value, less focus on the lowest price, but really more focus on maximizing their spending power. So they're not necessarily leaving the category. They're not necessarily boycotting other brands. They're just being more thoughtful about their consumption. And that can spin off in a couple of different ways. It can lead to greater consumption of larger pack sizes in shampoos, in soaps, in bath and shower. But it could also lead to, that splurge of that smaller mini super premium skincare anti-aging cream because they've been able to cut back on other categories so they can save up for the ones that they see a bigger benefit from. So it's definitely against this backdrop of heightened focus on value. But I think players who really cater to consumers and showcase the value of their product, whether that's in efficacy or in wellness or in the strength of the ingredients, will really win among consumers, because not just the Chinese consumers becoming more price sensitive, the global beauty consumers going in that direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that speaks really well to one of our global consumer trends of wiser wallets, and also something spoken to last week at the conference. Matt, I guess I'll flip to you. So in the world of consumer health, how are you looking at Performance 2024? And, what did we hear from players there? I know Kenvue was a big player in the health space from last week, but just in general, how did the industry perform?
Yeah, I think what Kayla mentioned resonates well with consumer health and health more broadly. However, we're starting a few percentage points in growth annually off what the beauty players are dealing with, right? So we also rely in the industry on China and Chinese growth over many years to sustain strong growth across the categories of consumer health, and that didn't happen in 2024 for the first time in many years. In fact, first time in our entire data set, Chinese growth was considerably off its historic pace and nearer to kind of worldwide growth because of the hot headwinds, the macroeconomic headwinds. Now, Kayla's point about value for money in the Chinese market, I think it resonates for a health perspective. But in general, the health categories have a lower income elasticity. So consumers aren't going to flee from the categories, but it does mean that they are going to scale back. And that's what we saw last year in China. So overall, you're seeing fast moving categories that rely on China, like vitamins and dietary supplements, doing considerably more poorly than in other years. Now, historically, that means that you can find a new place to kind of prop up your growth patterns. And the problem with 2024 was that in the standard markets from Europe and the United States, it was still fairly soft, allowing for the couple years of kind of inflation headwinds. Now in 2024, that pass through to consumers had already happened, but consumers really hadn't adjusted yet, right? So still consumers were waiting and seeing, or they're delaying purchasing, and that was happening in both Europe and the United States. Now, one final point I want to mention is we're finally starting to see green shoots in some of these regions, especially in the United States. We saw Q3 and Q4 for categories like vitamins and dietary supplements really took it on the chin for a couple of years. Actually, coming back, we saw really strong growth in those in those quarters. So that's potentially where we might be. We might be seeing quarter on quarter growth going into 2025, but I'm sure we're going to talk about this, Heather. There is uncertainty abounding now in 2025, so we don't know necessarily whether that's going to be a good runway for growth this year.
Right. Okay. So yeah, definitely a softer 2024 across both health and beauty, but I think there is still, there was talk a lot about innovation, investment, and growth opportunities across both. And so maybe that would be the next point. So maybe starting with you, Kayla, in beauty, how should we think about innovation and what players are doing? And again, this was definitely what we saw from L'Oreal, what we saw from Coty, from Elf. There was definitely talk about investments in different partnerships and different sciences. What's your take there?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of innovation, what consumers are really looking for as they're coming to this, cost benefit, junction, is that they're really looking for efficacy. So we've identified a trend for 2025 in beauty that we call clinical confidence. And this also addresses some of the pricing sensitivity. A consumer is willing to splurge on a product if they know that so much research and development went into it, if they know that the ingredient is going to be very effective. And then if they know that there's a lot of medical endorsements, it really ensures it guarantees a bit of transfer of trust. And so what we've seen is a lot of players making these investments with biotech companies. They're partnering with dermatologist universities and colleges and schools. They're really trying to bolster their presence in this more medical space, so that they can bring that clinical validation and those expert recommendations to their products. Where we see a lot of that growth is in the dermocosmetics area. And this is one of the reasons why a company like L'Oreal has done so well, because a lot of their portfolio is heavily associated with the dermocosmetics space. And in, whether you're a dermocosmetics brand or you're sort of dermo adjacent, or you're more in the science-backed medical positioning, consumers are really looking for that backing. It's not enough to just kind of choose vaguer claims. They really want things substantiated. And, some consumers are a little savvier than others, but I'll just make an example. Some of the local brands in China that we've spoken about earlier have done really well because they've partnered with hospitals. They've partnered with dermatologist clinics, and they'll release white papers. And so they're really thick into the research and development side, and consumers see that and they trust that. And if they're being squeezed on terms of what their purchasing power is allowing them to do, they're going to really gravitate towards those brands, and they're going to be top of mind. And so we're seeing a lot of brands, go into that space. And then also kind of try to draw inspiration from the esthetician space, to not everyone can have those treatments. They're a little bit higher in price. And so it's about drawing inspiration and maybe mimicking the results of those treatments, but bottling it or putting it into an ingredient to have, a product that may be comparable in effect, but significantly lower in price and more accessible to consumers.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's definitely what we heard from Kenvue, which, historically has definitely been expert-backed, expert-led, not only, as you say, in derm for skincare, but mouthwash in dentists, or baby products in kind of hospitals, starting just right from phase of newborn. So that definitely lands. I guess, Matt, shifting to you in the health space, how would you view paths for innovation moving forward?
I think there are a couple avenues. I think that they're tested certainly, but I think that they're under tested maybe in a way. So one is around tech, and that's been fairly prominent as a tech-based service adjacent to a product in the OTC space, and increasingly in the vitamins and dietary supplement space. I think Kenvue was remarking on their their allergy tracker for Zyrtec during CAGNY. I think that that's a good example of a space where there could be some potential gains for product sales, again because of engagement through the app. Allergy apps actually are actually well known in the OTC space as having a fairly high retention because of the utility of the product from a day-to-day perspective, as opposed to some other symptom trackers of other components. So I think there could be a lot potentially there with additional AI framing and personalization that I think Kenvue mentioned on their presentation at CAGNY. I think the other area around innovation is making bets earlier in the development cycle. The central problem with consumer health trends, especially trends on the supplements or nutrition space, is the trends die out before you can actually put a product into market to benefit from it, right? The trend cycle used to be 18 months, which was very short. Now it's something like 4 to 6 months if it's a trend that's being marketed on social media. So it's almost impossible to make use of it unless you have a product already in the market. So these companies need to make bigger bets for orientations or for demands that they think are going to be multi-year in nature or going to be systemic in nature, right? So I think Nestle mentioned this on theirs, and I think they had a list of a few orientations. One was around GLP-1 or weight loss. I think the other one was around longevity or healthy aging. So it's bets that are a 3 to 5 year development cycle as opposed to something that's within a cycle of a year or less. Now, whether those are the right bets remains to be seen. But these companies need to make those bets. They need to put their money on something that's going to last longer than a year or 18 months, because otherwise you're just going to be reactive and you're going to be on that same seat with everybody else of up and down, which is what we've been seeing for the last few years in consumer health.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, really have to consider that it's a different nature of the OTC business in terms of the R&D involved to launch and the regulations. I think that's a good point about the time period. I guess that feeds kind of into our next question of, the impact of social and working with influencers and campaigns. And, a lot of this is short term, and beauty does great with this. I mean, who's the influencer and what's the key theme and the trend is something that can change day by day. So I guess curious, what that means. We saw a lot from Elf, for example, in really working through influencers, a first Vietnamese woman as an astronaut, for example. So what that means there, and then I guess Matt, how can the OTC space, needing to look at longer term, bigger bets, 3 to 5 years, still capitalize on this channel? I guess, but first leading with Kayla for beauty.
So it's great that you bring Elf, because they're being really bold in terms of building up their brand equity. We saw that after the Super Bowl, so in November of 2024, they launched a production arm. They had their commercial had went viral, and there was a big appetite for just to be entertained by the brand as a lifestyle brand, and they launched this production arm to create long and short form content. And it's another way for the brand to connect with consumers. And so it really goes around this idea. It's not just marketing a specific product. It's just being in front of the consumer as long as possible, given the amount of hours in the day, and just really being top of mind. And, what we're calling that for PPC 2025 is loyalty immersion. And consumers are wanting to be entertained. They want immersive, shareable beauty experiences. They want to be able to connect with a community of like-minded other beauty enthusiasts. And this continuous interaction really helps build that. So that way, later on, when the brand does launch a product, they already have your attention. They don't have to fight all the other brands to get it, because they've already built this ecosystem of engagement online. And if you can successfully connect it to offline events, that resonates really well, especially with Gen Z consumers. And for them, having these interaction experiences offline is a bit more novel. So they'll go out of their way to experience that, because it's not been their norm in their beauty purchasing or their beauty path purchase. So yeah, I think Elf's doing a lot of great things, and I'm curious to see how it goes and how what it means for how other companies interact with their audience.
Yeah, that's great. And I think even just building off of, I believe what you had said before around this community and social engagement, that they're even, they launched in Dollar General in the US. And so not so much about the channel itself, but just the broader social engagement, the broader reach that they get through this.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because they've been so good with just connecting first with influencers and then building up the brand equity, to them, it's almost like, well, the brand equity is first and then the channel is second. So I think that's why they made that bold move to launch in Dollar General in the US. But then they're also at drugstores, and then they're also at beauty specialist retailers, mass merchandisers, or omni-channel. So they're really doing a lot of brand equity beforehand. And this is something we've heard from our team of analysts across the world, where Elf is not available in their country, but it gets so many hits from consumers in their country because they're almost pushing the demand for their products before they even get there. And this could be a year or two out. That's something we definitely saw before they had an aggressive launch in key markets in Western Europe. They were already there on social. It was just a matter of them figuring out how to enter the market, which channels to go in. But they've done a really good job of making their brand engagement on social rather than just tying to a certain channel.
Yeah. And I think this is a point that came up in some of our other sessions across other industries is really just meeting the consumer where they're at. So that's great. Matt, I guess to you in terms of, maybe more relevant to the supplement space for online selling, and what that looks like and what some of the approaches are.
Yeah, I mean, social commerce. I mean, everything that Kayla says about beauty, the consumer health industry is a few steps behind, but going in the same direction, right? So I think the players that you saw at CAGNY are in the health space are wrestling with, new channels and meeting consumers where they're at, like you said. That's a trickier play for a pure health company or an OTC
Mhm.
company for the reasons that you've already articulated, Heather. From a regulatory perspective, also from a brand a reliability and trust perspective. You can't get too far over your skis with influencers who don't pass muster, frankly, from a scientific backing perspective or
Mhm.
from an industry perspective. So the OTC's players are still going to be, I think, tepidly putting their toe in the water in that space for good reasons, right? I think there's a lot potentially to risk there, especially because there is potential pushback from some of those types of consumers around OTC products, around chemically derived products, around pharmaceutical products writ large. And so I think there needs to be some consideration on whether a marketing campaign in that space would work well, even with the right influencers, just because of potential reactions from consumers. Now, the supplement space doesn't have that problem. The supplement space is more aligned, I think, with beauty than with OTC at this moment, principally because nutrition and wellness fall well within the core set of the influencer universe and with what consumers are engaging with on a social media perspective. You're seeing a lot of pass through in social commerce. You're seeing a lot of engagement with live streaming, not just here in the United States, in fact, way more in the Asian markets in supplements. And we are actually now tracking that in Euromonitor through our e-commerce platform. And what we're seeing is it's exploding. And you're seeing brands that are D2C brands that start with nothing and become $100 million brand overnight, literally overnight, because of how fast these trends really flow through social media. Now, the risk I think is there because the collapse can come just as quickly, and trust I think is a fleeting thing on social media and passing through to social commerce. Uh, but it's there, and it's very, very potent at the moment, in brand development, in product formulation, etc. And I don't see why any of that's going to change. That's where people are getting their information. The friction is considerably lowered through the purchasing mechanisms, and this is where people are getting their information. So that's where we go to buy these products.
Yeah. Yeah. So trust a really key theme, I think, across both industries and from a channel standpoint, the influencer social from an innovation and being clinically backed or clinically confident. So that's great. Well, really great discussions, both of you. Thanks again for your time. And for those of you, you stay tuned. I mean, there's lots that we publish, both from a beauty or a health standpoint on our blog or also subscribers, our Passport platform. And yeah, look forward to sharing more in future. Thank you.
Thank you.